Hi, Truth Seekers. I'm Mark, founder and publisher of the Great Awakening Report, and your host for the Connected series. Our podcast is designed to help you connect the dots in these extraordinary and transformative times. In each episode, we dive into a wide range of timely and eye opening topics featured in our monthly, weekly, and special reports, offering deep context and clarity and perspective. I'm joined today by my co host, Craig Cook, who brings a powerful blend of wisdom, life experience, and spiritual insight to our conversations. Hey, Craig, welcome to the podcast. Excited to have you join me today.
Hey, Mark, I'm excited to be here and looking forward to today's discussion.
Great. In today's episode, we'll be focusing on the Great Awakening Practice Report. We venture to deep dive into the tools, discipline, and conscious practices that support personal awakening, collective transformation, and sustainable higher vibrational frequency. Let's get started. The soul's choice to spiritually awakening, a three-phase process. I'd like to quote a few quotes for you to get us started. Awakening is the moment the illusion cracks and the light of your true self begins to shine through. You are not here to become someone new. You are here to remember who you already are beneath the layers of forgetting. Every soul arrives at a moment of quiet knowing, a subtle pull from within, a call to awaken. The journey isn't forced. It cannot be taught. It is chosen. The soul's awakening is a conscious act of remembering, a sacred agreement to rise above illusion and step into truth, alignment, and purpose. The path unfolds in three distinct phases, each one a passage through layers of identity, fear, and conditioning, and a return to your original essence. These phases are not linear, but spiral, experienced uniquely by each soul. And yet, they all begin with one undeniable truth. You are more than this moment. You are here to awaken.
That's great, Mark. What I'm thinking right now is that people that are listening to this right now, it's only through synchronicity and divine timing that they would actually find themselves in this moment listening to what we're talking about. Uh, this spiritual practice of awakening. So, for all of you out there listening, it's no accident that you're here. This is your moment to your soul's calling. It means it's your time to awaken spiritually and begin moving beyond the 3D, the movie like matrix of life lessons and incarnational experiences that happen again and again. What lies ahead for all of us is a profound transition into higher dimensions, a greater density of consciousness, elevated vibrational frequencies, and it's really a beginning of your journey home, your reunification with source. And from my personal experience, I would like to say there are no shortcuts on the spiritual path. Many times people are in a rush, and especially in our mainstream society, in say first world developed countries, especially everyone's in a rush, wanting the shortcut, and there is no shortcut. True awakening requires active participation. It takes effort and time. It's about courageously engaging with your subconscious, releasing negative thoughts, emotional triggers, deeply held traumas, not by avoiding them, but by understanding the roots and ultimately finding gratitude for the wisdom they offered from those experiences. And that takes time and effort.
Those are great points, Craig. You know, let's try to simplify this a bit. What can what can feel like an overwhelming process? We've created a three-phase model. It begins with acquiring spiritual knowledge from trusted and proven sources, followed by cultivating inner wisdom through daily practices and reflection, and finally discovering a new reality through 5D experiences and conscious living. Each spiritual practice report will guide you through these three phases. Each phase contains 7 focus steps or topics. And as part of the Great Awakening report, we will continuously research, refine, and share updated articles and video content to support your evolving spiritual journey. Now let's move on. Let's start with phase 1, spiritual knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. Let's look at some key topic titles: ancient texts, spiritual teaching, free will universe, law of one, and ascension. And a quote for phase 1: spirituality cannot be defined, but can be described as a journey to the center of the soul.
Yeah, that's great, Mark. Phase one of this spiritual practice of awakening begins with exploring ancient spiritual texts, timeless teachings, and insights of thought leaders throughout history. The foundational phase is all about connecting those dots, deepening your understanding of the free will universe, what sometimes is called the grand experiment, and how it shapes your soul's journey through 3D, this holographic matrix of life experiences. And we also explore the concept of the game. Some people refer to it as the game. Which is a series of incarnational cycles that ultimately lead to completion, often described as the event, the end of times, or the ascension, just depending upon your point of view. And one of the most profound resources we reference is the Law of One. It's a The Law of One's a deeply resonant spiritual text for those that are not aware of that and have never heard of it. It serves as a cornerstone for our research and discussions. Really profound. It's a little tough to read at times, but the information is quite profound. And ultimately, what matters is what really resonates within you, and your intuition is the compass. It's your guide, right? And as your perspective grows and shifts, these texts reveal new layers. This is a lifelong journey. Again, no shortcuts. This takes a lifetime of experience. And it requires continued study, inner reflection, expanding awareness. And remember, while this path can be challenging, it's also incredibly rewarding. It's just filled with so many, what I like to refer to as miracle moments. And this inward journey through the heart is one of the most transformative experiences that you'll ever embark on.
Thanks, Craig. That's some really great comments and deeper insights into understanding what the Great Awakening, or what the lifelong journey of spirituality. Let's review some of the topic headings in phase 1. Let's start with the ancient spiritual text. What we know is there's 35 ancient spiritual texts that talk and describe spirituality, and God in some, or source, or prime creator source, in some context that is presented, and it's consistent. So there's some consistency across all 35 texts. And then there are key parts of the Bible, and there are other writings and manuscripts that actually kind of show us the way and help us understand, how to develop our own spirituality from within. What are some of your thoughts on this, Craig?
Yeah, there's across our global society and throughout history, there's been these profound teachers from various cultures that have come about. And yeah, certain texts are more mainstream, popular in certain parts of the world and certain cultures. And there can be perceived differences, but you can think of it as like a pizza, and there's made of different slices. And at the outer edge, you can consider all these different teachings and ways of organizing these teachings into religions, say. And the differences on the outside of it are pretty vast, and there's a lot of space. But as you get closer to the center of the pizza, the space between those slices gets smaller and smaller. And that's what comes to be the actual practices to connect to the divine, to connect to source. Once you're really starting to see the different patterns and just understand, like, oh, everyone's doing the same thing practically. They just have different names and labels on how to reach the divine. And it takes experience to go through that and understand that. And yeah, but it begins with this phase one right here that we're talking about.
Yeah, this is why we go kind of put this first, is it's important to know that we're looking at ancient texts. We're looking for what has gone on for time, and what is developed in knowledge and information and a knowingness of spiritual text that has come through the ages that we can go back and look at and kind of put it together in our own journey of what does spirituality mean to you. Let's move on to the next one, which is spiritual teachings or teachers and thought leaders. Some of the sources we use are Greg Braden, Wayne Dyer, Dolores Cannon, Eckhart Tolle, Alan Watts, and Carl Jung. So these are great sources that kind of explain some of not only the text and they go through history, but they also bring it current so it's applicable to our lives. So I know you have a few and you have practices and teachings on your own, Craig. So I'd really be curious kind of who some of your leaders, thought leaders are and teachers.
Yeah, so for myself, I really lean towards Taoism, and Lao Tzu is the primary say founder of Taoism, and there's just so many great teachings. Also, just from growing up in the Catholic religion, which was interesting, being raised Catholic, but kind of getting out of the institution and the power structure of that all. Just the teachings of Jesus are very profound and influential. And when you look at Lao Tzu and Jesus and Buddha and so forth, it's interesting. There's this pattern that emerges where the individual is deified, and then from that deification, this institution forms of all this structure and rules and regulations and hierarchies, and it just kind of changes over, gets away from the spiritual practices, and it's all about rules and institutional power structure. But when you look at these individuals and go back to their teachings of what they taught, that's what's really inspiring. So, those are just a few that that have an influence on me.
Next is the free will universe. You can't really have any discussion about spirituality if you really don't understand, how the universe was created. So we have our own report and we'll attach it obviously into this report also. But where it starts with free will, the universe is the creator is unconditional love. What is unconditional love? That's free will. And what is free will? It's the freedom of choice. And in order to have freedom of choice, you need an environment of duality and polarity. And so you need the extremes, and that allows emotions to kind of play out. And what we're here to do, it sets us up for what are we here to do is we're here to have lessons and experiences. So both negative and positive. So that applies to the lessons that we learn. So that's just kind of a rudimentary, kind of basic understanding of the free will universe. And but I think it's important that people kind of have that their own kind of formatting, if you will, of what they understand about the universe.
Yeah, 100%. And then it goes into the grand experiment, the game, right? Which you can kind of think of it as, everything's an illusion, just like we play video games. Everyone, the younger generation, they're so enamored with playing the video games, and you can see this game of life as the ultimate video game and a grand experiment. It's everything's an illusion, even though there's a chair that we could be sitting on and a desk that we're at, and it feels like it's real and it's solid, but what it really is a bunch of particles vibrating at a specific vibrational frequency, and there's a lot of space in between those particles actually.
Yeah.
So it's really illusionary, and it's a game. Now that's perspective, right? And it's this game of life streams where we have lessons through experiences, and we evolve over time. And yeah, which ultimately is this grand experiment, which then kind of leads us to the next topic, right?
Well, let me finish something on the game because I think it's really important for everyone to know. I think what I've learned is that each soul comes in and they have their own game or their own journey, their own path. And so part of what karma is, and I'll introduce karma kind of in this conversation, but part of karma is when we block somebody's free will. And so what's really important is that when we understand that everybody's here having their own journey, and then how we kind of line up with them, how we align with them, how our relationships So and that gets back to kindness and respect of everyone, but just that's the kind of the way I run my life. But having a respect for other people's journey really helps me separate from when they're going through problems or they're having issues. Do I get involved? Do I not get involved? Is this something that I should purposely? Is it something for their lesson, something that they need to experience on their own? So I think it really cleans up the understanding of how we integrate with people and how we talk to people and how we move with our families and friends and how we build and develop our relationships is having that real clear respect that they're here having their own journey. Let's move on to the event. Ascension waves from the galactic central sun, known as the source frequency. Um, these are cycles, and I kind of I'll cover two titles. There's ascension cycles, timelines, and evidence. But what this really means is there's the universe is set up with cycles. And as cycles move through, there's a 26,000 year cycle, which is kind of an ascension cycle. And you have maybe 1,000 lifetimes in that particular cycle. So, what that does is that brings you to a point where if you're ready to move on, there's a window. There's a window that's offered for you to move on to another frequency, a vibration, or a density. And that's what the soul's progression is doing is as it's moving back towards source, it uses these events to kind of transition.
Yeah, it's really interesting with cycles, and in that law of one, from what I remember, there's cycles within cycles. There's the say the approximate 26,000 year cycle, but leading up to the 75,000 year cycle, and like you said, based on uh, the soul's evolution, being able to advance on to say the next level of the video game, the grand experiment, or having to go ahead and repeat and go through all the levels again, right? It's fascinating. But why don't we get into I think the next thing is the law of one, right?
Yes,
Specifically.
going ahead.
Yeah, so that law of one is really a fascinating text, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, but I think this was came about around in the 1970s or somewhere around that time frame, and the information was channeled actually, and there's a very specific process by a few individuals that channeled in a ton of information. And again, as mentioned earlier, it can be a little bit of a tough read at times, um, but it's really profound. And as you start to digest it, it really starts to make sense. Just from a logical standpoint. And Mark, you could probably elaborate and share some of the insights from it.
Well, yes, this work was actually created right around 80, 81.
Oh,
And
81. Okay.
it's there's a lot of channel material out there, and this source is really pretty authentic. It's been verified in multiple different ways, even from the secret space program, if you can believe that. So part of the points that it makes is that how the universe was created, what we're here to do. It really gives kind of a background understanding other than the religious text that we've come through. So this really give an example. I've heard two or three different sources compare the Bible. The Bible might be 40, 45% accurate. And now I think there's a lot of conversation about the Old Testament being just a history book and the actual Bible is the New Testament. But the law of one is, credited with being about 85% accurate, and 90, nothing's, I don't believe anything's 100%. But the law of one just has so many key things that it actually entrains your brain, just like looking at sacred geometry. Once you read these words, it really becomes part of your consciousness. And so sit with it. You don't have to know and understand everything right away, but allow it to kind of wash over you and train it and just allow it to flow into your mind and into your thoughts. And that's how you start the process of really using the law of one as a great tool for really helping you understand as you move in more into this game and more into the future.
Yeah, yeah. One thing I remember is just as you said, you don't necessarily need to understand it, but you just process it. Because even some of the language can be a little confusing at times. Like, for example, the word distortion is used quite often.
Right.
And it's like, what are they talking about? Distortion. But if you think about it, with everything's energy, frequency, and vibration, it's talking about the distortion of vibrational frequencies and that disruption. And when you read it in context with that in mind, oh, okay, I understand what they're talking about when they use that term distortion. It starts to make sense after you have some time to sit with it, like you said.
Great. Phase two, the practice. Let's review some key terms. Let's start with the challenge. These are the trials, the testing, and the purge. Here's a great quote. Positive mental attitude, defined as comprising of plus characteristics represented by words of faith, integrity, hope, optimism, courage, initiative, generosity, tolerance, tact, kindliness, and good common sense. And this is a quote by W. Clement Stone. Now we have the daily practice guidelines, and here are some key terms: the observer, forgiveness, releasing, transformational breathing, and heart consciousness.
Yeah, it's great. This phase two, it's about an emotional reset. It's that essential inner work needed to shift your vibration and truly evolve. And a big aspect is forgiveness, which is often really misunderstood or overlooked. You can think of it as a core spiritual technology. It's more than just a gesture. It's just like, oh yeah, I forgive you. No, it's not just that. It's really a daily practice that helps you release subconscious resistance, dissolve the ego patterns, and to raise your vibrational frequency. And there's layers of forgiveness. It's not just about forgiving the person, but yet you need to also forgive yourself and also forgiving the situation and then also forgiving the creator. Because sometimes people can be, say, mad at God, for example, for the situation at hand. And so there's these multi layers, and that's why it's this daily practice because it takes time to truly embody that forgiveness. And once you do, you reach this higher frequency, and maintaining this higher frequency is key to stepping out of the matrix, aligned with a positive timeline and moving towards that ascension path. And this phase encourages daily observation of your thoughts, consistent use of emotional release tools, Mark, which I know you really like and used quite a bit in your journey here, and also the deep work of depolarizing your inner atmosphere. It's not easy, and this human experience demands courage and commitment. But through repeated practice, awareness, and emotional clearing, we begin to master the tools that bring lasting transformation. And phase two, this is where the real inner shift begins. So, Mark, how about we review the topic headings in phase two, and let's start with the observer.
Yeah, the observer is really critical. What are you observing? Um, you're observing what's going on inside of you first. Um, and you start with your thoughts. Everything's about thoughts, words, and actions. And so that's what brings about everything in life. But it starts with your thoughts. And most people don't have any idea of observing and what it means. It's not control of your thoughts. What it means is that you're observing what's going on in your mental atmosphere. And if you get off track and you get headed down a negative road with thoughts, you kind of you kind of pull it back and rein it in, and that's where you use the releasing tools to say, I don't need to be thinking about this. And a lot of people spend so much time spinning on negative thoughts and negative issues and reacting. We get into reacting versus responding. So that's what the observer teaches you, is how to take a time out so you can respond instead of react. So the observer is the number one key place to start. That's ground zero. And it's a developed art, or it's a developed skill that and it takes work. It takes work to really discipline and also you're looking at what's going on inside of you, not just outside of you, but what's going on inside of you.
Yeah, that's great, Mark. And then next is the ego, the unconscious monkey mind versus the heart conscious mind. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, it's kind of a fun one. We call it the ego, money conscious monkey mind. And that's the matrix. And then the heart conscious mind. The simple version of this is that when you're in the matrix and you're in the ego and you're in your mind and you're making choices and decisions based on your ego. And when you move into your heart conscious mind or your heart consciousness, you come from a whole different space. You choose to be in service to self instead of being in service to self. You choose to be in service to others. And that's the key thing that we're talking about is in going back to your mental atmosphere and the observer is what you're creating is a more positive mental atmosphere. And you start that with moving into your heart space. And really, I kind of have a practice, Greg. I don't know what you do, but I kind of, to start off, whether meditating or anything, I kind of take my hand and put it over my heart and tap, or I use tapping tools or whatever, just to make sure that I'm consciously down here around my heart. And that kind of is the way I start any process or any observations or any meditation to really make sure I'm moving and I'm shifted my consciousness into my heart.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, for me, typically, rather than just going straight into a meditation, because I do find when I do that, there's a lot of the monkey mind going on. It takes a while for it to settle. But if I do some qigong exercises prior, if I do those first, and then I get through, say, 20 minutes of qigong exercises, when I sit down to go into meditation, the mind gets much more relaxed and is able to really get into that calmer state of awareness, where the monkey mind just starts to really dissipate really quick. And then speaking of meditation, the next thing is transformational breathing meditation as a practice. And that's something that I've practiced for a number of years, and it can bring about profound effects as far as how it affects your body, but also your mind and your spirit. And Mark, I know you've done transformational breathing meditation practices as well. What are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, I also want to bring up the fact that we have a course in the Great Awakening Reports main website. We have a course section where we have a course on transformational breathing, which I highly recommend to people. Yeah, this is really important. I use this in my everything I do on a daily basis. And what it is it's basically breathing through your nose and exhaling through your mouth. But what that part is, that's part of consciousness. When you take a moment, whether you can feel tension or there's a moment where you don't feel well and whatever, if you want to really shift that, almost anything you're dealing with, um, whether it's body or emotions or mind, if you really want to move it back into a positive space, is the transformational breathing. And I find I can do it now. It's within seconds. If I can consciously start breathing and I call it belly breathing, breathing from deep down in your stomach, but then exhaling. And what you're exhaling is you're exhaling all that negative, all those negative thoughts and those negative emotions and feelings that get trapped in your body. That immediately releases that. See, a lot of what people don't understand about practices are to use in the moment when things are happening in your life. And if you can be conscious enough and observer enough that if you use some of these tools in the moment, they can return you to a positive mental state, a happy state, a high frequency state immediately instead of waiting till the end of the day or the next day and living with that negativity or living with that negative experience and sitting with it. All that does it just adheres, to your subconscious mind, and it makes it so much difficult to get that released.
And that's especially true with the releasing practice tools that I know you've practiced for many years. And if you want share with the audience some of the techniques that you use, that'd be great.
Well, yeah, thanks, Craig. In the report we try to put as many tools as we can. There's tapping tools. I prefer the Sedona method, which is could I release what I release when, and when is the activator. That's the release. But what I find is, and we're going to go into the 7 steps of emotional reset that you can kind of really do in the moment. But practice, there's one thing about forgiving, and everything is really about forgiving yourself, forgiving others. And then I add to it, one of the primary things we're here to learn is we're here to learn to love ourselves. And so with this, and what goes with that is that it's one thing to forgive, but it's another thing to release. And so I spend maybe just as much time on forgiving. And as I go through and develop over time, I've spent probably more time on releasing. And so the releasing, they're very close. We do at the same time. But anyway, releasing is really critical because that returns you to your positive vibrational frequency, your positive mental attitude, which is really critical. And you can't do a forgiveness practice without a releasing practice.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And I really like tapping. You mentioned tapping too. I think that's for myself, that practice too is highly effective. And all these practices, it does lead to the next topic, which is that elevation of vibrational frequency. And that's that state that as you're going through life and we're having this experience, this in this grand experiment, we want to progress, we want to evolve and move forward. And what's really core and central to this entire process is maintaining a high vibrational frequency, to elevate it and maintain that vibrational frequency. And all these practices that we're talking about do that. And, for me, I prefer the Qigong practice, and all these different types of exercises and meditations that I know really get me to a state where once you achieve a high vibrational frequency, it opens everything up to where you become a receiver to what's in this energetic matrix that's all around us. Everything is actually information expressed as energy vibrating at various frequencies. And as you elevate, you're able to be a receiver of information that can give you guidance through this path. So, what are your thoughts, Mark, on that?
It's really interesting. The research that we've found and what we've studied, the core or the place to start is you go into your childhood or you go into your early life experiences, or there's a relationship experience if you're older. There's all of us have stuff that we need to forgive. Forgiveness is the core releasing tool that allows you to move to a higher frequency. If you don't release those things that you're either in denial on, or things that have happened to you in the past, or things that come into your consciousness, into your mind from time to time, those are the things that are holding down your frequency. So that's the first element. You got to work on those issues to release those, to clear those issues, forgive those issues, and then you got to clear them with releasing. And that's kind of the basic, that's the core one. Then the reason why we call it the practice is, if you want to, I call it elevating and sustaining and perpetuating, or achieving and sustaining your ascension vibrational frequency. What that means is that as we understand it, there's one high frequency, and that's kind of the vibrational frequency. We either rise and raise ourselves to that frequency or not. And so that's kind of the challenge, or what we're all trying to do. So what's really important as you begin to do this work, you get a feel, you get an internal feel, where you're vibrating, and how that's working for you. So the way to sustain a vibrational frequency or higher vibrational frequency, we're all human and we all make mistakes. We're all going to have poor choices, and we're all going to have moments of, where things get triggered. Instead of responding, we react. So the key is having, which we're going to get into now, is we have tools, or we have a tool that immediately allows you to return to that higher state of frequency. And that is the game. The game is, can I maintain a higher frequency, even though when I'm challenged, and we're challenged quite a bit, to basically have our frequency lowered by all kinds of negative events that happen.
Right, right. And that really leads to a positive mental atmosphere that we're able to maintain and actually be productive, more
Right.
efficient, more effective in our interactions with other people, right?
Yeah, the mind freezes when it's in fear, or when it's in the negative. It freezes. It can't think. It doesn't flow. And when you're in that positive mind state, that's when your best decisions are made. That's when you're the most creative. That's when, and that's why we call it being in the present or the power of now or being in the moment. See, all these tools that we're talking about, it brings you back to being present. That's where everything is created. You create nothing in out of the past, meaning you only create things when you're living in the moment. Anything in the past and anything in the future, and it's really what I call the three religious control factors is guilt, shame, and fear. So guilt of the past and shame for the future and fear is right in the middle. It fear of both. And so once you understand that those are kind of the negative factors that hold you back or hold you down, then you understand how to say, okay, now I need to kind of develop the tools or have the tools in place so I can return myself to that positive mental atmosphere.
100%. And that's where sometimes a reset is necessary, which leads to our next topic of 7 steps for an emotional reset. Because throughout the course of our days, when we're experiencing emotional triggers, it could be a resurfacing of a traumatic memory or recall of negative experiences. What one can do is use the following 7 steps to reset your emotions. Is a process that shouldn't take more than 5 minutes on an issue or trauma or an experience. And you add both forgiveness, like you were talking about earlier, it's so important, and the releasing practice to the exhale portion of your transformational breathing practice. Then repeat until the emotional release is confirmed, and then returning you to your calm state of a higher vibrational frequency. Right. So,
Yeah,
go ahead.
no, that's great, Craig. Let me I use this quite a bit. So, what I found though, in working with people on our team, even that a lot of people would say, no, I had an upsetting day and I dealt with it with meditation at night or whatever. And I said, whoa, whoa, let's go back and look at what's going on. What you need is a tool that you use immediately in the moment when it's happening. So what is critical is that if we hang on to a negative emotion till the end of the night or whatever, it just takes so much longer to get rid of that emotion and what it's attached to your subconscious mind. So it's really important that you understand you have a tool that works really as quickly as you can observe that things are kind of gone wrong, as quickly as you can observe the emotion, the negative emotion. That's when you want to kind of begin the process, if you will. So the steps are really clear. I say you observe, you move into your heart space, and this can be done in seconds. Then you breathe, you begin the transformational breathing through your nose, mouth. I call it 3 clearings. And then you start the practice tool, which is could I forgive, what I forgive, blank, and then when, and that's the release. Then the finishing is could I release, what I release, when, and then I confirm, I relax, I do it as much as I need to do it until I feel it's a feeling. It's really important. You got to feel this. You have to feel yourself release the negative, and then you move back into kind of a calm, positive state. And then what you do is then you say, now I'm good to go, and I'm gonna move that into my back into my positive mental state. I used to, I'm going to share this one more thing with you because it's kind of funny. I used to, when I started, I carried around a 3x5 card. I printed all these up because I kept reacting and everything and I couldn't respond and I kept reacting because I just didn't have a practice. And so I actually wrote this up on a 3x5 card and put it in my pocket. And then I used it. And I'll tell you something else too. I had something on a trip and kind of a relationship thing, and I was really kind of upset about it. And I released over 50, I used the tool 50 times in one day. And
Wow.
by that evening, that was so upsetting for me, but by that evening, I had calmed down and I had returned to a positive mental state. I went out and I had fun with my friends and I enjoyed the trip, and but otherwise it would have made maybe their first trip or maybe most of the trip miserable because I was just in an emotional upset state. But this really saved me, and it proved it to me. It was really proof but I had to use it 50 times. And so, but remember, the releasing tool I'm talking about using, I use it, takes less than 3 minutes. Just could I release, what I release, when, could I forgive, what I forgive, when. But I'm doing that while I'm breathing. And so that's the key. The key is that when I'm breathing, exhaling, I'm calming down. And then on the exhale, could I release what I release when? And that's how I use it.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's a great example that you bring up where if someone takes the alternate approach where, oh, I'll just wait till the evening and I'll meditate, or maybe the next day, the next morning, and I'll work on clearing that stuff out. But that energy starts to settle and it starts to coalesce and get denser into the energetic anatomy. So then it takes more work to clear it out. So in the example that you provided, you're dealing with it in the moment, getting it out of the system before it even has a chance to settle, and you are able to actually enjoy yourself and have a good evening. So I think that's a great example to follow that methodology that you bring to the table there. It's really good, Mark.
Yeah. And I'll leave this one more key. You just do it until you feel a release. You can feel it leave you. Oh, I have to tell you this one more thing because it's really important. I used to have an energetic feeling where I'd get a tingling in my neck. I mean, it would tingle. And so
Mm-hmm.
when I released and I knew I could find the right thing to release on, I would have a physical reaction in my spine, in the top part of my spine. It would tingle. And then I knew. And so that not only that was how difficult the problem that I was trying to release on, but look at the impact that it it had on my body and that I had released it. Meaning, and you're in the energy practice, so man, negative energy can be very disruptive to the body.
Yeah, that's a really great story that you bring to the table because from a Chinese medicine, energetic medicine perspective, there's the saying that Shen affects Qi and Qi affects Jing. What that
Right.
means is spirit, which you can think of your heart and mind, your thoughts and your emotions, affects the energetic matrix that is part of your energetic anatomy, and then that energetic anatomy actually affects Jing, which is physical matter, which is your physical tissues. So your heart and mind, your thoughts and emotions that you're describing was affecting your energy. And when you did the releasing, you released all that, your spirit was free, and then it impacted your energetic anatomy, and then that impacted your physical anatomy, and you felt the tingling on your spine.
Right.
It's a perfect example of how it works.
Yeah, that's cool. That's really cool. Okay. Hey, all right, let's move into phase three. And this is the fun one. This is the experience. And this is what we all look for. Why do you want to do this? Why do you want to create these practices? Why do you want to do all this work? Because the rewards are stunning and exciting. So let's get into this phase three. Phase three is about the journey home. It's about 5D awareness. It's about spiritual gifts, the event, Ascension. A fun quote that I like is yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery. Today is a gift of God, which is why we call it the present, which is from Bill Keene.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great quote. So, yeah, let's talk about this. Our 3D experiences are the primary tools used in aiding us as we move through our incarnations and go through these third density lessons. And it's the soul's choice and the decision to ascend. It's based on the soul's completion, of hundreds or thousands of lessons and experiences. And, these games represent unique lifetimes tailored to each set of experiences lived in this grand experiment. Yeah, at the end of say, the 26,000 year cycle of incarnations, it's that soul's opportunity to advance into higher range and frequencies and vibrations. And once the collective awareness of one's soul, their spirit and higher self has, really exhausted, self-examined and mastered to a satisfactory level, then the lessons, then and only then will the soul really choose to move on. It's that evolutionary process. And following is a series of 7 unique experiences that verify and emphasize the soul's choice to ascend. So let's review those, Mark.
Yeah, these are key benefits. So, number one is you exit the 3D matrix. And what that is, that's a mental thing. You're mentally stepping out. And I call it the bridge of no return. You cross the bridge of no return where you really don't want to go back. And what that means is that you understand the matrix, the prison. Planet Earth is really a prison, and we just don't see our bars. But And once you understand, also a part of this exiting 3D is learning about what 5D is and what 4D in other realities. And once you learn and begin to be educated, and also it's a remembering. Let's get back to kind of how we started. That's the remembering part. When you remember where you came from, or maybe other lifetimes that you had in those experiences, and that's where the veil goes up. That's another part of exiting the 3D matrix, is actually the veil's going up, and in many, many ways, of your past, of kind of what the current reality is versus the reality that we should be creating. So, exiting the matrix is a really big deal.
Yeah, 100%. And then another thing is synchronicities, right? And synchronicities are what are experienced as we really get into this third phase, because it's more than just the studying and then going through phase two. But as we go into phase three, when everything really starts to come to life, we experiences things in throughout our days that just go beyond statistical probability, or it could just be a really just surreal moment. And I like to call them miracle moments. And there's all kinds of different signs and symbols that people will receive. And it's really about recognizing them when they appear, so that it creates the awareness. And then a good practice is to actually journal about those synchronicities that are experienced. And as you do that, you're giving recognition to the spirit world that you are aware and recognize these synchronicities, and they start to bring it on even more so. What are your thoughts about that, Mark?
We have a fun one that we share together, is how we first met. Not only what is a synchronicity, but that we realized in conversation. I don't know who asked who, but we both said, "Are you seeing 111?" And you go, "Yeah, I'm seeing all kinds of numbers." So that,
Yeah.
the numbers thing is a really big deal, I think, for all of us, because what you need to be aware of is when you see a number like 1111 or in the clock or whatever, what that means is whatever you were thinking about before or after in that moment, uh, pay attention. Pay attention to either what those thoughts are or what's going on. That's kind of how I use it. The other thing is that certain numbers that you can look up on the internet, it's really easy, but you can look up the meaning of 444 or 555 or 333, 1212, 1010. So there are all kinds of sequences that we see that represent something. And so it's, if you want to pay attention to that, it really helps you understand that, hey, I'm basically awakened, and I'm journeying down the path.
Yeah, I remember that meeting, Mark. It was funny because we were probably an hour into our meeting, and then, yeah, I don't remember who asked too, but suddenly it came up, and like, whoa, you see it too? Like, and then our
Right.
conversation really
Right.
started,
Right. Right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, 20 years ago, most people at the time weren't talking about that. That was very rare for people to talk about. And I think it's much more
100%.
common. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Today it's much more common. You see it on
Right.
angel numbers all over the place on Instagram and
Right.
social media. But yeah,
Right.
back then, yeah, it was, I thought I was going crazy at first, the first six
Right.
months. I didn't even tell anybody, for 6 months. Yeah. So yeah, it was so funny. Just that first meeting was just a
Right.
synchronistic event
Right.
in and of itself.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things, your relationship with my son and all the things going forward for over the last 20 years. But and it brings us to what we're doing now together. It's very clear that certain things were brought together for us to obviously do and share and experience. So yeah, it's been a fun journey to do some of the stuff with you.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and through that, as we from that moment, and as we continue to interact, and just the synchronicities, these signs just started pouring on even more so. Every year it just started to change and evolve, and it's just been such a fascinating journey. And actually, I'm even looking at the clock right now. It's just funny because it just turned 444.
That's great.
It's great.
That's perfect. That's perfect.
Yeah, that's not the first time this has happened with us.
That's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
it's hilarious. It's so
That's
funny.
good.
All
It's
right.
good.
Well, we should probably move on. We could talk
Yeah.
about just that for 2 hours,
Right,
probably. But
right. Absolutely.
yeah. All right. What's next on the table, Mark? Living from your heart, right?
Yeah, I call it the heart mind consciousness versus heart consciousness or heart expansion. Look, there's a whole universe inside. And what you learn as you cross that bridge of no return, and what that means is that, we've been taught from childhood as part of the programming or whatever that there's nothing inside, everything's outside. You have to be so focused on even religion. It's set up to there. You need an intermediary or you need a third party, but there's nothing inside. And so the real key is to learn and we have to learn it. I have to practice, really touching my heart, going into my heart, getting back into my heart space. And also, once you take that journey, I call it a doorway. And once you walk through the doorway, it's an expanse and it's expansive. It's a whole universe inside. And once you astral travel, then we get into the spiritual gifts of what you can do and what happens when you're inside, telepathy, and then you get back to remote viewing. You intuition is heightened and skilled. All your instincts are much more highly alert. So all of these things really get kicked up to multiple levels. But what's really going on is you're just heightened awareness of just the universe and other realities. Those are the positive experiences that you get from taking this journey.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you mentioned about like awakening your spiritual gifts, and that definitely happens along this journey as you become more conscious and you expand your consciousness and you attune your body. And your body's like an instrument, like say a
Right,
guitar, piano,
right.
and these spiritual gifts awaken. And yeah, it's really really fascinating. Um, what's next here on the table here, Mark?
Let's, ascension, resonating frequency, and resonating is the key. So what's happening is that once you take this journey, and one of the benefits is you start resonating and you feel that resonance frequency. You feel it, you begin it's like anything in life, it becomes very comfortable. It becomes like a shirt or a coat or some
Hmm.
pair or even a pair of shoes that you really love. Hey, that's my favorite. That's what resonating means. It means that you're in a space and you're in a kind of a calmness. And let's talk about the mind, body, spirit. You're in a calmness, a mental state, and a spiritual state of, you feel it. And see, a lot of the things that we do, it's one thing for mental and the create the idea or whatever, but really to manifest these things, and what you're doing is manifesting a resonant frequency, is you have to feel it. And the feeling is it's already done. It's already been accomplished. You're already experiencing it, and you're experiencing, and that's what we're doing. All of us now are experiencing 5D in some way, shape, or form. And that's what's resonating for most of us. And that's really what we're sharing with each other.
Yeah, and that's a great segue into the next item, is mapping your personal timeline. Because what you just talked about is really when you're feeling it and as if it's already happened, that's when you go into this co-creation mode where you're starting to really affect your reality, mapping your personal timeline, finding your path. And it's takes some practice for some. Sometimes some people get it a little easier than others, but it's all possible. And it is exactly what you're talking about, Mark. When you're that aspect of feeling it is so important, coupled with the visualization and the mental aspects of positive affirmations and so forth, and you really start to find your way and co-create your reality.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're really mapping your positive timeline, and that's what I like to call it. And what are you mapping? You're mapping the 5D experience. You're mapping, releasing anything in 3D that just doesn't, some of us have gotten rid of money, gotten rid of possessions. We don't need them, don't want
Right.
them. And
Yeah.
and we and so once you do things physically, then it takes over in the mental state where, this mapping, it's really fascinating because it's multi-level, it's multi dimensional, And it's really important that the work that you're doing creates kind of, it's your journey. Your journey is another way to say it's your map. It's your map of the path that you're taking. And we're talking about all the tools and all the different things to kind of bring together how you even what I know I'm on my path. I've got such a clear indication I'm on my path. It's amazing. I don't doubt it now. There's no doubt. There's no concern. Sure, I have conversations with the universe where I say, do I go this way, or what would be the best choice that I could make? But that's all. That's all. And I have a process of how I do that. But that's what the mapping is all about. It's really your path.
Yeah, and that's really leads into the next thing because as you find your path, you end up finding your tribe, right?
Right. Yeah, and that's really beginning to take off. We're really beginning to sense those people around us that are vibrating at the same frequency. There's also some connectedness, past life things, and there's other things that we're feeling and sensing. And so, and it's this tribe thing is it's greater connection than anything than we've experienced in our families. And it's a much deeper, much resonating frequency, especially now. And if you're awakening and going through this process, it's very important that you understand your tribe is coming, and it's part of your timeline. It's part of what's mapped before you. So be aware.
Yeah, that's great. And the last thing is really realizing who we are, right? What our
Yeah,
essence is.
yeah, yeah,
You're right.
yeah.
You're right.
It kind of goes with everything we're saying. It kind of, but it does kind of, it's in the report because it's something that you need to be aware of, that all of these things, it's leading to a 5D reality. And that's the name of the game. And this game. And I think all of us that are having this conversation, and if you're listening, is you're in the end game. In the end game, it's time to move on. It's time to do something different. What that means is 3D. A lot of us, it just the 3D experience is we're done. We don't need it. We don't value it. There's, hey, I could have another nice meal. I could go on another vacation. I could have another relationship. I could do whatever, but it's not what's important. There's other things that I'm ready to move on to.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Well, Mark, do you want to close us out today?
Yeah, and as we close out today, this episode, we invite all of you to reflect on where you are in your own journey. That's really important. And whether you're just beginning to explore ancient teachings or actively working through emotional layers of your daily life, or you're experiencing profound synchronicities or heart centered shifts, know that your path is sacred. Every step, every challenge, every insight is part of your unique awakening. The soul's choice to awaken is never random, it's a divine appointment. And if you've found yourself here listening and learning and resonating with us today, you're already answering the call.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, Mark. This is the path of the courageous. Awakening isn't always easy. It typically isn't at all. It requires presence, practice, patience, but the rewards are beyond anything the material world can offer: clarity, purpose, peace, and connection to source. And each of us, we're here to remember who we truly are, to reconnect with our soul's blueprint, contribute to the light of this collective transformation. And let the tools and insights we've shared today be a guidepost as you continue your inner work and expand your awareness, and just great peace and blessings to you all.
Thank you. If today's episode resonated with you, we encourage you to revisit the three-phase process on your own time. We published over 20 weekly special spiritual practice reports over the last 3 years for you to review. Phase one is the spiritual knowledge, reading, studying, researching, questioning, connecting the dots. Phase two is the practice, observer, transformational breathing, forgiveness, releasing, raising your vibrational frequency. Phase three is the experience. Live your truth, trust synchronicities, embody your highest frequency. Remember, awakening is not a destination, it's a choice, it's a journey.
And no matter where you are, you're not alone. Remember that. You're part of a growing tribe of awakened souls, truth seekers rising together. So keep exploring, keep connecting, keep choosing light and great peace and blessings.
Thanks for joining us today. And thank you, Craig, for doing this wonderful podcast with me today.